Good evening. Today is Thursday, March 31st, 2022, and this is the 91st episode of New Paradigms. I'm your host, Sargis Sangari. During the years of the Obama administration, Susan Rice, Hillary Clinton, and at that time Vice President Biden chose to mirror the Chinese Communist Party inspired new model of power relations that really promoted a new kind of a world out there with three major spheres of influence. That would be China, Europe, and America. However, in this case, America would have to cede Asia to the Chinese Communist Party, and while Europe at the same time would see either Russia or the European Union domination and a return to what was a neo-fascist structure of the old system. Finally, the United States would have to retreat almost to our own boundaries and have a pretty dark future. A managed decline is how President Obama actually named it in 2018 and phrased it. Fast forward to where we are today with the Russian-Ukrainian war, it looks like to be a proxy conflict that is designated to move the chessboards of the nations into the same configuration initially that was proposed by the CCP's Wang Yi, who was initially actualized by the Susan Rice in 2014. Now, where we are today is a reality of what I wrote about in 2015. President Trump may have initially interrupted the initial progress of the proposal of the plan, but the Biden administration, especially the executives in that are managing the executive branch and President Biden, have put us back on that fast track of that foreign policy. Iran is a signatory to the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which is led by China and is about to strike a new deal for a joint comprehensive plan of action, JCPOA, with Russian negotiators with the current U.S. administration. In Europe, the migrant crisis, funded and encouraged by the European neo-fascist blocs out there, is resettling massive groups of individuals that carry an unbridled and unchecked hatred for the state of Israel and the Jews into the hearts of some of the major European capital cities like Paris, Berlin, London, and others. Here, even at the United States at home, there's a resurgence of fascist ideology that's increasingly turning anti-Semitic, unchallenged by either the Jewish community living in the United States or the human rights watchdogs. Soft anti-Semitism now is increasingly giving way to a very real open anti-Semitism with support for the nuclear capable Iran that's vowed to obligate the Jewish state. In this context is why I wanted to invite my honored guest today, Ellie Cohanim, who served as a U.S. Deputy Special Envoy to Monitor and Combat Anti-Semitism at the U.S. Department of State during the Trump administration. She was the State Department's first Iranian-born Jewish envoy. Ellie, it's an honor to really have you here today with us to discuss what it seems to me, at least, to be the outsourcing of anti-Semitism amongst what we call the new model of power relations. It's good to have you here.
Sargis, thanks for having me.
Ellie, I have to tell you that one thing people don't know, that the Jewish people use the same calendar as the Assyrian nation. So we share the month of Nisan, which is the month that begins the Assyrian New Year. And today is actually the eve of the Assyrian New Year, 6772. And also your last name, Cohanim, actually is a meaning of priesthood that is used to name and the last name pronunciation that implies a lineage to their relationship to the priestly class. Of course, within Judaism, it began with Aaron, Moses' brother. But in Assyrian, actually, the cognitive portion of it it translates to Kahan. And Kahana itself is actually what means priest in our language. So there's always a relationship between the two communities, and I just find that interesting to have you here and discuss what is happening within the region, given the two cultures that have lasted the longest within the Near East region.
Well, first of all, Happy New Year to you. And I have to say, just on that note, the month of Nisan, although in the Jewish calendar it's not the new year, most people might know that Rosh Hashanah, which takes place in September, is considered the Jewish New Year. There's a tradition that the springtime and Passover is actually, considered kind of a time of renewal for the Jewish people. It's when they left Egypt. And so it's very interesting to see all these similarities, and Happy New Year to you and everyone celebrating. And Sargis, thank you for having me on. Your opening remarks are really quite accurate. And I think that we are talking at a moment of great difficulty. This week in Israel, we've seen a terrible bloodbath of terror attacks, leaving 11 Israelis dead. And I want to note that the victims were not just Jews. There was a Christian police officer who was a real hero and was able to stop one of the terrorists, and he was killed in the attack. And there are others who are, reflecting the diversity of Israel, Jews, Muslims, Druze, and Christians, all victims of these attacks this week. And so we're living really in very difficult times. And what you stated about the rise of anti-Semitism really is something that studies and surveys are showing is rising in every corner of the globe, and unfortunately right here in the United States as well.
No, it's unfortunate, but it's a reality of what we're seeing, and I don't think it's going to get any better. The source really starts with Iran, going back now for both of us when we left Iran and came to the United States because we just couldn't live within the structures of Iran. I know that you had said one thing in an interview that you had done with Bradley Martin, who's a close friend of ours, prolific writer. And you had stated in your comments to him that, quote, it's only a matter of time before the people of Iran actually take back our beautiful country. What conditions do we have to have, do you think, that are necessary for the citizens of Iran to begin a change within that country?
Sargis, you're exactly right. I was born in Iran myself, and my family fled in 1979. There's a book that recently came out by the granddaughter of Mr. Habib El-Vanayan, who at the time was really the president of the Iranian Jewish community. And he was the first civilian executed by the radical Islamic regime during the early days of the revolution. And so at that point, most of the Jews in Iran, we understood that we were a threat, that the regime was making an example of Mr. El-Vanayan, and so my family fled, and the majority of the 100,000 Jews that lived in Iran at the time, majority of us fled. And I think you were kind of referring to the fact that we were one of the most ancient Jewish communities in the world, tracing back our ancestry to the first temple period in the Bible. And so we had survived thousands of years under different rulers in ancient Persia, which became modern day Iran. And to think that we survived until 1979 and could not stay any longer, it is such a dark chapter in history that the Jews had to escape, again, one of the most ancient civilizations that we had. And so Sargis, what you said about the Iran, it's exactly right. Iran is the only country in the world that threatens to eliminate Israel. And unfortunately, right now, we're seeing the Biden administration any day now, I am sure, will be announcing a new Iran deal. And as we all know, I think, ad nauseum, we've heard the faults and the weaknesses of this deal. Everything from the fact that the clauses that limit Iran's nuclear enrichment sunset in 2.5 years from now, to the fact that the entire deal expires in only 9 short years from now. And at that point, the international community is greenlighting and making legal Iran's aspirations to achieve nuclear bomb status. The fact that the deal doesn't deal with Iran's ballistic missile activities, the fact that it doesn't deal with their terror proxy activities, all of that. And yet we see this administration kind of hell-bent, no matter what the Iranians demand in negotiations and what the Russians demand and what everybody wants to be walking out of the room with a piece of the pie. The Biden administration seems to be acceding to all these very, very unreasonable demands, and truly not only putting Israel at risk, not only putting our other Gulf traditional allies, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and really the entire Gulf Sunni states at risk, but also putting Americans at risk. And it's astounding to me how they think that they can do such a thing. And I have no doubt they're planning to bypass Congress, even though the Iran nuclear deal in one way could be treated as a treaty, in which case it needs to be submitted to Congress, or in another way, because of the Iran Nuclear Agreement Review Act of 2015, would demand that if it's being treated as an agreement, that it be submitted to Congress. But I'm pretty sure what the Biden administration is planning on doing is kind of going back to the Obama playbook. And what Barack Obama did was he took the deal immediately to the United Nations and bypassed the U.S. Congress. I'm pretty confident that's what the Biden plan is as well.
That's unfortunate because, I mean, under the President Trump's administration, and you actually did participate in it, that, we thought that we had something moving forward with the Abraham Accords. I know that you participated in it and worked closely with Saudi Arabia, as you mentioned, the Muslim World League, among other interfaith efforts. So what is the current state of affairs for the Abraham Accord? Do you think it's going to be just nothing more than a Near East reshuffling of the maps where you have Israel and the Abraham Accord nations working together? Is the U.S. under the current administration has pretty much have been hands-free as far as being involved to make sure that the Abraham Accords are supported and sustained?
Well, first of all, I want to say that it was a privilege and an honor for me to serve in the Trump administration. As you said, I was the Deputy Envoy to Combat Anti-Semitism, and in that role, I was a member of what we called the War and Peace team. So obviously the people who were the architects and really the leaders of the Abraham Accords in the Trump administration were, President Trump and senior advisor Jared Kushner and the whole team really coming from the White House. But and what I saw, with my own eyes in office is something that I don't think we thought would happen in our lifetimes. It's something that we dreamt about for our children and grandchildren, which is this opening in the Arab world. And we see it play out every day, that I believe there is now this acceptance by many of them, what I would consider the moderate states in the Arab world, their leaders and even their citizens, for the presence of a Jewish country in the region. And I think that, since 1948 and the founding of the State of Israel, there's been this rejection of a Jewish state in the region. And there was in the early years, there was this notion that they were gonna have wars with Israel and declare wars and invade and that they were going to win. And, I don't even know how you explain the Israelis kind of winning every time. But whether it's the 1948 war, the 67 war, every war that Israel was forced to fight, they wind up winning. And so now here you are in 2020, let's call it 2019, when the Trump administration starts to understand better, I think, the dynamics of the Middle East better than any previous administration, Democrat or Republican. And I would tell you there's a few things that the Trump administration understood which led to the success of the Abraham Accords. Number one, they understood the Iranian threat to our Sunni allies, and they countered the Iranian threat. So they won back the trust of our Sunni Gulf allies, which Barack Obama had alienated them then, and we see Biden administration, Joe Biden alienating them now. But the Trump administration was able to rebuild that trust and those ties. The second thing that the Trump administration did by moving the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem and other similar actions was signaling to all these countries that Israel as a country is here to stay, right? There's no getting rid of Israel. Everyone needed to kind of accept the fact that Israel is going to be here. And then the third piece of it was, I think, taking away the Palestinian veto. You have this famous clip of John Kerry sitting there in this very arrogant manner and saying, there will be no separate peace, and he was so proven wrong with the Abraham Accords, because the Trump administration took the veto power away from the Palestinians to try to stop peace progressing in the Middle East. And so when the Trump administration did that, that is the result. The results that we saw was these historic warm peace deals between the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, followed by Sudan, Morocco, with Israel. And I would tell you, Sargis, that this week, when we saw this Negev summit took place in Israel, that was very much the continuation of the Abraham Accords, where for the first time in Israeli history on Israeli soil, they hosted the foreign ministers of Morocco, of the UAE, of Bahrain, but also of Egypt. And of course, Antony Blinken was there as well. And so all of this to me is very, very incredibly hopeful. I think that if you look at the statements that came out of it, first of all, there was a statement made that the summit was going to become some sort of a permanent body, and that there was going to be joint capabilities. I think they used the word capabilities in the statement that was made afterwards. There was much talk about the Iranian threat, which obviously is a threat to all of these countries together. I think all of these countries are feeling the frustration against the Biden administration. That's another thing that draws them together. And then we saw these really kind of, to me, very poignant remarks from the United Arab Emirates foreign minister, when he said something like, "Oh, Israel's been around for a long time, but this is for all of us. This is our first visit to Israel, and we have to catch up. We're curious. We need to learn." And that was an incredible moment. I think, again, we were witnessing history of these Arab foreign ministers standing in solidarity with Israel.
No, look, it would have been wonderful if your replacement was there, but the nominee that was nominated for your position afterwards just made it to the committee approvals just on 29 March of this month. So that in itself, and even how the previous administration, POTUS actually used sanctions to be able to really squeeze Iran to get us to this point, to actually show the Abraham Accord nations that we're serious about countering Iran. Look, we put sanctions against Iran, but we kept the port of Chabahar open, at the same time allowing India to build that port, to run a railhead into Afghanistan, which really put pressure on Pakistan to force the Taliban to come to the negotiation tables. We put the IRGC under a sanctions requirement, which legally allowed us to target Soleimani, killing him. The same person actually went to Russia, talked to Putin as far as having Russian forces move into Syria when initially Assad was in trouble. And today, unfortunately, we're not targeting the head of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, as he's traveling wherever he wants to do whatever he wants in violation of the sanctions. We're looking at removing them off of the sanctions, at the same time negotiating through our intermediaries in the Middle East to try to not only help sustain Assad now, who was a war criminal, as it was called by the people in the current administration, but now even be able to give him money to sustain him for the long run against the allies who helped us in the region. And I know that Secretary Blinken is going to come back from this so-called trip. Of course, he'll take credit for what he did, but I'm sure that everybody will be reminded that the mayor of Jerusalem was not really happy, and kind of laid it out as to why the current administration is failing in this capacity. But I guess I would ask you another question in this capacity. What hope do you have for you, Ellie, and others like you who have worked in these type of lines of effort for the future, especially given that the current geopolitical circumstances are not the same as they were under the Trump administration? Is there any hope that we're going to be able to at least have more positives from the U.S. being influential, or is it going to have to be Israel going alone with these Abraham Accord nations?
So, when the Biden administration came into office at the beginning, they were not using the language of Abraham Accords, and then they got some public pushback against it. Now they are using the language. You see a lot of statements from Secretary Blinken, from America's ambassador to Israel, Tom Knight, saying that they support the Accords and so on. The thing is that in order to support the Accords, you also, the idea isn't that that these are the countries that make peace with Israel and then there's nothing left to do. Even before the Trump administration left office, President Trump made a statement that there were about something like 5-6 other countries that they were in talks with that were considering making these same kind of peace deals with Israel. So for the Biden administration to really encourage more peace deals would mean to be working on this in a very strong way. And I don't see any indication that that's what's going on. So I'm not optimistic that the United States is going to play a big role in this administration in advancing further peace talks. And I have to say, I don't like to publicly criticize the Secretary of State because I know that a lot of these policies, whether it comes to Israel, certainly Iran, are coming from above him. I don't know that the Secretary of State in this administration has that much leeway. But when he was in Israel this week, he met with Mahmoud Abbas and he made a statement after that meeting talking about, making this moral or whatever, this equivalency between Israeli settlement construction and demolishment of illegal, Arab structures in the West Bank area with the Palestinian authorities pay for slay policy, which is, the Palestinian Authority actually pays either terrorists who commit terrorist actions against Israelis, or if they die in the operation, then their family members for many, many years. And they pay them much more generously than these people would have earned because most of the terrorists are coming from the poorer classes. So it's this huge financial incentivization for people to commit acts of terror. And I just find it reprehensible that the United States would ever make such a statement comparing those two things.
Well, look, unfortunately, at the same time, he made the comments as the White House was trying to walk back President Biden's comments as to that Putin cannot remain in power. He said that we have no plans for regime change in Russia to include any other country, which was a reference for the Iranians. But, the Iranian Jewish community lives really under a second-class kind of a status, and is often excluded for certain jobs and places. Several individuals within the Iranian government has stated that their Jewish community is always under surveillance and is always mistrusted. I know that the Rezai, Iran's VP for Economic Affairs, has already threatened to hold them as hostages if there is a need in the future. Do you feel that a hands-off Biden administration further emboldens Iran, that they may attempt to use the Jewish population, as a bargaining chip when they're bargaining with the U.S. or Europe in this case?
Well, that statement that you referred to by the Iranian vice president, it came at a moment when we saw a number of sabotage incidents in Iran where it was either their nuclear or other facilities were suddenly, somehow they were kind of having these meltdowns or incidents, and most people were assuming that it was Israeli acts of sabotage. And so, within that context, you hear this Iranian vice president threatening that, the Jews in Iran are not going to be treated this way, kind of indicating that they wouldn't be safe if Israel took further actions against Iran. If I remember correctly, actually there was actually a lot of strong words being exchanged at that time, actually, between Israeli government officials and Iran. It was also at a time not only were the sabotage incidents taking place, but I think that there was some of this kinetic activity in Syria and in the naval forces, and so that's when he made this statement. And I think that it certainly proves that as much as the regime has this talking point where they try to say, oh, we don't hate Jews, we don't have any problem with the Jews, it's a Zionist entity, and we want to eliminate the Zionist entity, and so on. But in this kind of moment, I think the Iranian regime reveals their true colors. In fact, they do hate Jews. Let's not kid ourselves. And so in the fact that they are willing to hold this population hostage and use them as some sort of a political bargaining chip, they do reveal themselves in moments and statements like that. But truly, you look at the Iranian regime's track record. It's our administration not only designated Iran as the number one state sponsor of terrorism in the world, but we also designated them as the number one state sponsor of anti-Semitism in the world. And the reason being not only their treatment of their Iranian Jews as second-class citizens, but also the fact that as state policy, they deny the Holocaust. They hold Holocaust cartoon competitions, if you can imagine something so vile. This is a country that it's so much of its terror proxy activity is aimed at Israel. So whether it's Hamas in Gaza, whether it's Palestinian Islamic Jihad in Gaza, whether it's Hezbollah in Lebanon, and even the Houthis, a lot of people don't necessarily know this, but the Houthi slogan is a takeoff on the Iranians' death to Israel. And so this is their obsession, and this is what I've called it an obsessive anti-Semitism. In fact, this anti-Semitism is part and parcel of this Islamic radical revolutionary ideology, and it motivates so much of what they do.
Well, my uncle, who's Yonanan Bet-Kolya, who was actually the representative of the Syrian Christians in Iran, who recently, just this past election, left and retired, he had constantly tried to push as much as possible to make sure that the Jewish community and the Armenian community were also represented in any discussion there was. Unfortunately, even for us as Assyrians, and I remind people that the position that exists in the Parliament of Iran for the Christians was awarded during the Shah's time. If it wasn't, I guarantee you, even probably that minority would not have had a say in anything that we were trying to do on behalf even of our Jewish, as we call them, Qarib, brother-in-laws within the region in Iran. But look, Ellie, what can be done to combat?
I just want to push back on that for just one moment. Just because there is this seat in the Iranian, you would call it parliament, I suppose, because there's this seat for a Jew, it doesn't, at the end of the day, it's pure symbolism. And for me, I think what I understand it to be is another talking point for the regime. Just to say, again, we're not so bad. Look at us. We've got a seat reserved for a Jew. But, do you think this Jew has any actual power? Is there any doubt that the Jews in Iran live in constant fear? There's no doubt. They understand the limitations that they live under, and they're fully aware of what they can and can't do, what they can and can't say. And at the end of the day, they're treated like pawns by this regime. So it's not by any stretch of the imagination anything more than symbolism.
No, it is, and I understand how it is as information operations and doing a pretty good job as far as trying to push it forward. Ellie, one last question for you. I know you're busy, but I would ask you that given everything that is out there as far as the situational awareness is concerned for us, what can we do when you have these government, and you mentioned even sometimes the non-government entities are out there now and these watchdog groups that are somewhat really not doing their job in order to be able to support, I guess, what needs to be done. It seems like sometimes they're even complicit in the outsourcing, in this case to Iran, and in other cases with the refugees, migrant groups that are pouring into Europe, really kind of against the Jewish community. What can be done to counter that, and how does that affect other minorities?
Well, I'm glad to answer that, and then I have to run. But when I was in office, we had these kinds of difficult conversations with our counterparts in Europe all the time. And certainly Europe needs to figure out their immigration policy, and they need to figure out, now that they have had this huge wave of immigration onto their shores, how are they going to integrate these new folks that are now going to be living in their countries? How are they going to make sure that these immigrants adopt European values? And so, this is a big task that the Europeans have in front of them, and it's going to take people to really kind of drive this home, that this problem cannot be left unanswered.
Ellie, with that said, I know you're very busy. I heard your phone ring. You're a person who's under very much demands. Before you leave, though, where is it that people can maybe learn a little bit more about the work you do, and what is the next thing that you have coming up in the near future?
Well, Sargis, thanks so much for having me on, and I'll be happy to join you another day when it's not as crazy for me. I am on many social media platforms. I'm on Twitter, I am on Facebook, and I'm on Instagram. So on Twitter, it's at Ellie Cohanim. Same on Instagram, it's at Ellie Cohanim. And Facebook, you can find me as well. So I do hope that people will follow me. I hope they'll reach out to me and direct message me. I'm very good with engaging. And I look forward to thoughts from folks on this conversation and everything else that you and I are both doing.
Ellie, we would love to have you back. I'm going to let you go, and then I'm going to close it out because I know they're calling you. For our audiences that are out there, I want to make sure that everybody knows that, if you like the type of program we have, we're going to get Ellie back in again to be able to support us. We do need help. United Assyrian Appeal, especially on this Assyrian New Year's Eve, has been very instrumental about helping the Assyrians of northern Iraq, especially during the genocide of 2014 and 17. We're still sending money there. And also at the same time, we're working this year with the South Sudanese refugees issue, given everything that has happened under the current administration, from the pullout of Afghanistan and what is possibly, as even President Biden mentioned, a global famine that is about to hit the regions, including the African regions. So if you like, please help us out. Much appreciated. It gives us the operational capacity to be able to help. And at the same time, I want to thank especially Sim Production for the wonderful job they do. If it wasn't for their type of a podcast support with production, we would not be able to be where we are today. Ellie, God bless you. Thank you very much for everything you have done for the nation, and hope to see you in the future and other endeavors. With that said, ladies and gentlemen, in Assyrian Happy New Year, Idochen Avabricha, 6772, and hopefully we'll have another 1,000 years of prosperity under God's blessing. With that said, there's new paradigms.